my experience in this is that the US tends to be a little bit more hire and fire. So they'll make a decision more quickly, give that person a try, and if it doesn't work out, they'll rotate them and try again. Which, as we've just mentioned, is an enormous waste of time and money, and culturally, it's a disaster. So that tends to happen a little bit more in North America than it does here, but we do it here as well. I mean, it's extraordinary how much time and effort we waste. The other big mistake, and this is a probably a shout out for a good old recruitment company, but there too often um, people hire through people they know. Now, if I sit down with a prospect who wants to build a business in Europe and say, "What's your advice on how to do this?" Of course, I would say, well, before you go and pay for a recruiter, you should look at your own network, but don't limit it to your own network. Because if you've got two or three people that you think are awesome, great. But if you go and pay a recruiter 20,000 to bring you a shortlist to compare those against, that 20,000 will often be paid back tenfold compared to hiring your buddy or your person that you did a great job in this other company that then joins you and isn't successful.
Or you go on LinkedIn and put out a job offer and see what comes in. Yeah. I mean, really, it is these are shortcuts, but as you're pointing out, they may be more costly in the end, or probably will be more costly in the end because of mistakes made.
Probably, Shelley. I mean, I'm loath to say, it's a waste of time reaching out to people on LinkedIn because if it works, that's great. But don't be tempted to take someone that's an 8 out of 10 on your list instead of a 9.5 or a 10 out of 10 just because you know them and won't have to pay a fee for them. That's
Yeah.
usually a disaster,
Yeah.
and it's a very false economy.
Could I, Paul, just change tack a little bit? And if you put your founder's hat on, your entrepreneur's hat on for your own business, now you started this company 28 years ago. Could you just go back to a time before that, the startup of your business, and tell us a bit about your background and what led you to do this, to do what you're doing today?
No, I mean, when I say money, I don't mean to make a fortune. I mean to earn a living and put food on the table. Um, so, very long story short, but I didn't enjoy school. I worked on my uncle's farm. I was encouraged to go to agricultural college. I spent 4 or 5 years driving tractors and milking cows, and then realized that this was not a way to make any money, as much as I quite enjoyed it. And my brother said, go, you can talk and you can listen, go get a sales job. Um, and I spent 3 years in the toughest kind of sales, knocking on doors with a typewriter under my arm, selling in central London. Did quite well out of that, made some decent money, but I wanted it to be a bit more professional, and I went looking for a job, and I went to speak to a recruiter, and they said, "Paul, you've got an agricultural degree, and no one will give you a job in a proper computer sales company without a degree. But why don't you come and work for us?" So I did that, and that was about 38 years ago, and I took a 50% cut in my salary to join a company that recruited. I was the sixth person in a company that recruited salespeople into the technology sector, and I worked in that for a few years, 6 years, and then set up on my own. I worked for myself by myself for a short period of time. Didn't enjoy that at all because I enjoy people. I then looked for an advertisement. I looked for another job, frankly. I wanted to work with people. And some people out there will have heard of James Caan, who is in was one of our dragons in Dragon's Den for a while, which is, what do they call it in North America? Shark Tank or something?
Oh yeah, Shark Tank.
Yeah. Yeah, he was an interesting guy, but he was working with an American called Doug Bugey and setting up a recruitment franchise. And they offered me a job to go and work for them, which I did for a couple of years, which frankly was like, Doug was I think he was probably the most knowledgeable person in international recruitment at the time. He'd spent a lot of time working for an American recruitment franchise. You guys will know this, MRI in the States. And I learned a lot from him. I was working 18 hours a day, just about, um, and eventually thought, I'm not going to do this for forever. And I stepped out and set up my own business initially as part of the franchise. So I don't know if I want this published, but I didn't get a great deal out of being part of that franchise because I'd been a trainer in that organization, and all I really got out of it was a network that didn't work particularly well in those days, and a trainer to come and help my people that I'd trained. So it wasn't a huge advantage to me, and so I got out of that as quickly as possible, which was about 5 years. So that took me to 2001, and since then I've been growing Oakstone, and it's that's how I set it up. I mean, it was almost out of necessity, as I say, put food on the table. But I love what I do, and I'd learned a lot working with different types of organizations and different sales leaders, and I just enjoyed doing it. So I set this business up, and I've enjoyed it ever since.
Well, you had the passion and the sort of need that kind of came together. Can I jump in with a question, Blunt, that I didn't want to lose track of? I'm very curious, Paul, because today, I mean, we were alluding to this before. Startups need to hire people, and they're caught between a rock and a hard place. They want the highest quality people for the lowest possible price. But there's also been, I think, over time, you've seen this, I'm sure, changes in how compensation is defined. So, compensation today can be some sort of combination of direct salary, future ownership of the business, I don't know what else. So what are you seeing? What are some of the creative ways that are appealing to talent to bring them into these startup organizations?
So I've seen this cycle. In the late 90s and the very early 2000s, before the dot-com crash, everybody wanted to have giant chunks of equity if they possibly could, stock options or stock. And quite a lot of people made a lot of money out of it, and others lost quite a bit. So that then became less interesting to people. So through the early 2000s up till about 5 or 7 or 8 years ago, whatever. So the people were way less interested in the stock participation route, and I've seen that come back. So today the good people over the last 3 years, the good people have been looking for stock play. How much can they get out of being involved in a startup and getting some either stock or options? So I haven't seen it change that much, other than to go from people wanting stock to then not being interested in it to now wanting it again.
So in terms of maybe advice you might give startups hiring people, looking to hire people, equity is still a very viable component of the compensation.
It is now a viable component again. Yes, very much so.
Okay.
And there's no question whatsoever, the best people, the top certainly 5% and preferably top 10%, will ask that question early. What's the stock play? How do I get some action? Because if they're good enough, they know that they can get it.
They can affect it. So they can affect it too.
Absolutely, they can affect the upside of it totally. It's very much an important part of today's offering. And if you want a top 10 sales guy, and I mean that without sexual focus, guy could be a girl as well.
Absolutely,
So if you want the top talent, the top 10%, then you should be offering some kind of equity.